What would you do if you visited your daughter's grave and found a cemetery worker standing there with a baby in his arms crying as if he had lost the same person you came to mourn? And what if, in that single moment, you realized he knew a truth about your daughter that you never did? Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Harlan Westwood spent most evenings in his Tribeca penthouse, surrounded by polished glass, muted city lights, and the kind of quiet that echoed more loudly than any argument he'd ever had with Ilara or Rowan. At 62, his life looked impressive from the outside. Sleek cars, a marble foyer, a skyline view framed like a painting. But inside, the rooms felt more like waiting chambers for regrets he had never learned how to put down. He dressed simply that morning, choosing the dark wool coat Ilara once said made him look less like a CEO and more like a real dad. The thought alone was enough to pinch something soft and fragile in his chest. The day carried a soft chill, one of those late October mornings where the sky seemed permanently brushed in silver. Harlan took the elevator down by himself, waving away the doorman's offer to call the car around. He preferred to drive alone today. Driving gave him time to think, though the thoughts rarely brought peace. The streets of Manhattan were slow to wake. Delivery trucks idling near the curb, a pair of joggers sharing a laugh, the muted hum of a city building itself back into motion. He moved through it quietly, hands steady on the wheel, as if the whole world was part of a ritual he'd repeated every year for more than a decade. Crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, he lowered the window a few inches. The cold air brushed his face, bringing with it a memory he wished he could hold without pain. Ilara leaning outside the car window at 16, laughing at the wind tangling her hair, telling him the world looked prettier when you didn't try to control it. She had always said things like that. Simple, wise, overlooked by him more times than he could count. Greenwood Cemetery greeted him with quiet dignity. The long sweep of autumn trees, their leaves gathering in soft piles along the pathways, felt almost like a welcome. He parked near the familiar stone path, stepping out slowly, the single red rose resting in his hand. He walked with the reverence of a man approaching a confession booth. Each step carried years of apologies he had never spoken aloud. As he turned toward the old oak on the hill, he expected the usual stillness. But instead, he heard a faint rustling, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying and failing to stifle sobs. When he rounded the bend, he stopped. A young man, no more than his early 30s, knelt by Ilara's headstone. His shoulders shook as he wept openly, palms pressed to his eyes. Beside him, a little girl in a lavender jacket arranged small stones into a careful pattern, humming quietly to herself. The scene struck him with a disorienting tenderness. He cleared his throat to steady himself. "Excuse me," he said softly, trying to keep his voice from cracking. "This is my daughter's grave. May I ask why you're here?" The young man startled, wiping his eyes quickly. I'm sorry," he said, standing too fast. "My name is Evan Hart, and this is Lunette." The girl looked up then, her curls brushing her cheek, her eyes bright and impossibly open. "We come here sometimes," Evan added, "to visit someone we lost. But today we also came for someone who meant a great deal to another person we loved." Something shifted inside Harlan, a slow tightening, like a thread pulling taut. "And what does that have to do with my daughter?" he asked. Evan hesitated, glancing briefly at the child beside him. "It has everything to do with her," he said at last. "Because Lunette, she's connected to Ilara in ways you don't know yet." The little girl stood, brushing the leaves from her knees. She walked toward Harlan with that unguarded curiosity only children possess. "Hi," she said softly. "Are you sad today?" He tried to answer, but words scattered inside him. The child had eyes like polished amber, the kind of eyes that held stories even before they were old enough to understand them. Something in her gaze felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. Before he could speak, Evan gently touched her shoulder. "Sweetheart, why don't you collect a few more stones near the walkway? I want to talk to this man for a moment." Lunette nodded, skipping away, her jacket flashing between the branches. And then, in the quiet that followed, Evan stepped closer, voice trembling but resolute. "Sir, Lunette is Ilara's daughter." Harlan felt the world narrow. The wind stilled. The rose slipped from his fingers, landing silently on the fallen leaves. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. "That's not possible?" "And it is," Evan said gently. "She was born 2 months before the accident. Alara kept it secret because she was scared. Scared of how you'd react, scared of disappointing you, scared you'd disapprove of the life she wanted." Harlan lowered himself onto the cold grass, unable to stay standing. It felt as though someone had cracked open the last 10 years and swapped his memories for ghosts he had never learned to see. He tried to steady his hands, but they trembled uncontrollably. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. Evan inhaled slowly, eyes softening. "She wanted to. She just couldn't find the courage. And then life happened faster than anyone expected." When Lunette returned with a small pink stone cupped gently in her palm, she held it out to Harlan with a shy smile. "This one's special," she told him. "You can have it if you want." For the first time in years, Harlan felt something warm flicker inside him, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. He accepted the stone with both hands. That simple gesture began the unraveling of everything he thought he knew. Harlan turned the small pink stone over in his palm as if it were a message written in some language he had forgotten how to read. Lunette waited for his response, her eyes bright with the earnest patience only a child could offer. It struck him how gently she existed in the world, soft footsteps, quiet humming, delicate hands arranging pebbles with reverence. But beneath that gentleness, something else stirred in him. A pull, a recognition, an ache. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he managed, the words rough from disuse. "It's beautiful." Lunette beamed, the kind of smile that seemed to lift the entire gray afternoon. "It's my favorite color," she said. "Pink is happy." Then she paused, as if reconsidering. "Mommy liked blue. Daddy said she painted skies a lot." The sentence fell so softly he almost missed it. Painted skies. He felt a pinch of air leave his lungs. Alara had painted skies as a teenager. He remembered walking past her bedroom once, finding her at the window with a watercolor set, trying to capture a sunrise that was already fading. He'd told her she was wasting her time. Now he wished he had framed every painting. Lunette wandered off again, humming, and Harlan looked back at Evan. "You said she meant something to someone you loved," he said quietly. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. Evan inhaled slowly, eyes softening. "She wanted to. She just couldn't find the courage. And then life happened faster than anyone expected." When Lunette returned with a small pink stone cupped gently in her palm, she held it out to Harlan with a shy smile. "This one's special," she told him. "You can have it if you want." For the first time in years, Harlan felt something warm flicker inside him, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. They dreamed of a quiet life somewhere upstate, near a lake. She painted a little room for the baby. Skies, trees, stars. She said she wanted her child to grow up seeing beauty everywhere. Something in Harlan's throat tightened painfully. Alara had always dreamed of quieter places. He had always pushed her toward louder ones. When she died, Evan added, Silas never recovered, but he tried. For Lunette, he raised her the best he could. He told her stories about her mother every night. He made sure she knew she was loved. Harlan looked down at his hands. He wasn't sure if they were shaking because of the cold or because of everything he had missed. 10 years of birthdays, morning giggles, bedtime stories, years that could never be reclaimed. After a long silence, Evan sat down beside him in the grass, not too close, just enough to share the weight of the moment. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said gently. "I came because Lunette deserves to know where she comes from, and because Silas wanted her to have family, real family." A cluster of leaves brushed past them, tumbling softly along the hillside. Harlan steadied himself, watching Lunette arrange the stones into a little winding path. Each placement was deliberate, careful, as if she were building something she hadn't yet found the words to name. "Does she know?" he asked. "About me?" Evan shook his head. "Not much. I told her she has a grandfather, that he loved her mom very much, even if life made things complicated." Harlan exhaled shakily, almost laughing at the understatement. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. Alara had slipped through his fingers long before she was gone. He had been too busy chasing deals, chasing numbers, chasing an idea of success that cost him more than he ever realized. He felt the cold stone of the grave marker behind him and let his hand rest on it, tracing Alara's name the way he used to trace her palm when she was little and would fall asleep on the couch waiting for him. "If she had told me," he whispered, "I would have, I don't know, tried. Maybe I would have ruined it. Maybe I wouldn't have. But I wish she had given me a chance." Evan offered a soft, understanding nod. "Maybe this is that chance," he said. "A different one." Not with her, but with the part of her still here. As if summoned by the words, Lunette ran back toward them, holding a tiny leaf between her fingers. "Look," she said breathlessly. "It's shaped like a heart." She pressed it into Harlan's palm, adding shyly, "We can share it if you want." For a moment, he simply stared at the small leaf. A fragile, imperfect heart, but a heart nonetheless. And then he looked at Lunette. Really looked. Her smile, her gentleness, the soft curiosity in her eyes. Something inside him settled with a quiet finality. He wasn't sure what came next. He wasn't sure if he deserved whatever it was. But he knew with sudden clarity that he couldn't walk away. Not this time. The drive back to Manhattan felt longer than usual, though traffic was light and the morning sun was just beginning to warm the pale October sky. Harlan kept both hands tightened around the steering wheel, seeing everything and nothing at the same time. The little pink stone Lunette had given him rested in the cup holder, catching stray beams of sunlight each time the car turned. Each glint felt like a tug, a reminder that the world he thought was complete in its emptiness had just opened a door he never expected. When he arrived back at his building, the doorman greeted him with the familiar, "Good morning, Mr. Westwood," but the words bounced off him without landing. He nodded politely, rode the elevator up to the 54th floor, and stepped into the penthouse as though entering a museum exhibit of a life that no longer fit. The silence was heavy, but no longer neutral. It felt like judgment. He laid the keys on the marble counter and walked to the living room window. Manhattan stretched out beneath him, glittering with steel and promise. But for the first time, he sensed a distance between himself and the city he had built his fortune on. As if it were an old acquaintance he no longer knew how to talk to, he sank into the leather chair by the window, letting the morning light spill across the floor. He could still hear Lunette's soft voice. "Are you sad today?" Children had a way of asking questions adults were too afraid to say out loud. She hadn't said the words with pity, only truth, offered like a hand beside a fallen branch that needed lifting. The apartment had never felt so large, or so painfully quiet. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady the swell of thoughts. Hilara had a child, his granddaughter, a little girl who smiled at him with open trust, unaware of the years of silence and mistakes that had led him to this moment. And Evan, steady, tired, carrying the memory of two people gone too soon, had spoken with a gentleness Harlan wasn't sure he deserved. For a long while he simply sat there, letting the waves of realization wash through him. When he finally rose, his knees felt stiff, his breath uneven. He walked toward a small wooden box resting on the bookshelf. A box painted by Alara when she was 8 uneven flowers, smudged colors, her name written in crooked letters across the lid. Inside were the things he had kept, her brush from 2nd grade, a tiny seashell she'd insisted was magical, a snapshot of her laughing on the beach with her hair all tangled from the wind, and one folded piece of paper, a note she'd left on his desk the morning he missed her school play. "It's okay, Dad. Maybe next time." He closed the lid gently, holding the box for a moment before placing it back. When the doorbell rang, Harlan startled. Hardly anyone visited without warning. He opened the door to see a familiar face, Marcus, his driver. Calm, dependable, standing with his hands lightly clasped. "Sir," Marcus said, "you left your phone in the car. Thought you might need it today." Harlan took it, offering a quiet, "Thank you." Marcus didn't usually linger, but today he hesitated. "Is everything all right, Mr. Westwood?" he asked softly. Harlan studied him. For years, he had interacted with Marcus the way he interacted with most people, efficiently, politely, but at a distance. Today, the distance felt different. He found himself answering with more honesty than usual. "No," he said quietly, "but I think it could be." "Oh." Marcus nodded with the calm understanding of someone who had watched more of Harlan's life than he was ever credited for. "If you need me, sir," he said, "just let me know." After Marcus left, Harlan stood in the doorway, phone in hand, heart thudding with a strange mixture of fear and hope. He turned the device over, debating. Then, with a decisive breath, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he'd forgotten was still there. Rovan, his son, a relationship frayed more than a decade ago. Reaching out felt intimidating, but necessary, like tending a neglected garden before it withered entirely. His thumb hovered, but in the end, he didn't press call. Not yet. He wasn't ready for that conversation, not while his emotions were still raw from the morning's revelations. Instead, he sat down and opened his laptop. If he couldn't reach out to his son yet, he could still look for answers. The first thing he searched was Lunette Hart, but nothing meaningful appeared, just a school directory page and a local art contest from last spring, with her name handwritten at the bottom of a colorful chalk display. He tried another search, Silas Hart. This time, articles appeared, a modest obituary from 3 years prior, a memorial post written by coworkers, a few photos from community volunteer events. Silas looked kind, steady, the kind of man who seemed to soften a room simply by being in it. In one photo, he was holding a baby tiny Lunette, bundled in a yellow blanket, her tiny fist gripping his shirt collar. Harlan stared at the image for a long while. Silas had been there, present, loving, everything he had not been for Alara. He closed the laptop and leaned back. A memory rose slowly, one he hadn't thought of in years. Alara at 8, handing him a drawing, their family standing under a tree, holding hands. She had illustrated him taller than everyone, with a bright sun drawn above his head. "That's because you're strong," she had said. "You can fix anything." He had believed her once. Now he wasn't sure. The phone buzzed suddenly in his hand, pulling him out of the past. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Westwood, this is Evan. If you want to meet Lunette again, she asked about you. We could arrange something if you're open to it." Harlan stared at the message, breath trapped in his chest. Of course he wanted to. The need felt bone deep, urgent, impossible to ignore. But what could he offer her? What could he offer any of them? He typed a reply slowly, hands trembling slightly. "Yes, I would very much like to see her again." Before he hit send, he paused, rereading it. The words looked simple, but they carried years of unspoken hope. Then he pressed the button. The message whooshed away, and with it, something inside him loosened. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he would show up. For once, he would show up. The hours that followed drifted by quietly, the way late afternoons sometimes do when a person is no longer sure what to do with their hands, their thoughts, or the weight sitting in their chest. Harlan moved through the penthouse, as if rediscovering its rooms, each space tidy, polished, and lifeless. He paused at a framed photograph of him and Alara at a pumpkin patch when she was 10, both of them squinting in the sunday. Her arm was looped around his waist. His hand rested awkwardly on her shoulder, as if he hadn't known then how to hold someone gently. He wished he could step back into that moment, just long enough to do it right. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Evan. "She's drawing right now. Asked what your favorite color is." The words brought a warmth he hadn't expected. He typed back, "Blue. Tell her blue." He set his phone aside, pacing slowly toward the balcony. The city glowed beneath the settling dusk, headlights beginning their nightly dance along the avenues. Somewhere in Brooklyn, the little girl who carried pieces of Alara's voice and smile was asking about him. That alone felt extraordinary. A soft knock suddenly echoed through the apartment. Harlan frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, a neighbor from 2 floors down stood there holding a small package. "This was delivered to my unit by mistake," she said kindly. "From a children's bookstore." Harlan's breath caught. He hadn't ordered anything. But when he read the tiny printed label, "From Evan and Lunette," his hands trembled. Inside the package was a slim children's book about stars, with a handwritten note tucked between the pages. "For when you want to learn the sky with me." L. He sat down right there in the entryway, the book open across his lap, the building air turning still around him. He had missed so many firsts with Alara, but maybe not too late he could be present for someone else's. His phone buzzed once more. Evan again. "Prospect Park. Saturday morning, if you're ready." Harlan stared at the message, the soft hum of the city just beyond the glass. He typed a single word, steady this time, "Yes." And when he hit send, He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a faint, trembling sense that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet name. Saturday arrived with the kind of soft autumn light that made Prospect Park look almost like an old family photograph, warm, a little faded, comforting in ways Harlan couldn't quite articulate. He parked farther than usual, wanting the walk to steady him. The air carried the familiar scent of damp leaves and distant coffee carts, mingling with the laughter of children rushing toward the playground. He followed the path along Long Meadow until he saw them. Evan was seated on a bench, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Lunette stood a few feet away, balancing on a fallen branch as though it were a tightrope, arms stretched wide for balance. She spotted Harlan first. Her face brightened, and she waved with such unfiltered enthusiasm that he nearly forgot to breathe. "You came!" she called out. He smiled, a small but genuine lift at the edges of his mouth. "Yes," he said. "I told you I would." Lunette hopped off the branch, her sneakers crunching through the leaves. She approached him with a shy excitement, as if she were greeting someone both new and familiar. "I brought something," she said, pulling a folded paper from her jacket pocket. "I made it last night." She handed it to him carefully. It was a drawing of the three of them herself, Evan and Harlan, standing under a tree. Above them, she'd drawn a sky of scattered blue strokes. "You said blue was your favorite," she said, "so I made the sky extra blue." He took a slow breath, steadying the swell of emotion rising at his chest. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Thank you, Lunette." Evan stood up, offering a small nod. "Morning," he said quietly. His tone held warmth, but also an unmistakable caution, the protective instinct of someone who'd had to safeguard a child through more loss than anyone deserved. Lunette hopped off the branch, her sneakers crunching through the leaves. She approached him with a shy excitement, as if she were greeting someone both new and familiar. "I brought something," she said, pulling a folded paper from her jacket pocket. "I made it last night." She handed it to him carefully. It was a drawing of the three of them herself, Evan and Harlan, standing under a tree. Above them, she'd drawn a sky of scattered blue strokes. "You said blue was your favorite," she said, "ever since the cemetery." More curious than usual. Harlan nodded. "I'm still trying to understand all of this myself." They reached a gentle slope, overlooking a wide stretch of grass. Families picnicked on blankets, dogs chased frisbees, and a brass quartet played soft jazz near the promenade. Lunette ran toward the music, spinning once in delight before settling into a slow, playful sway. Evan chuckled under his breath. "Silas used to dance like that. Not well, but with heart." He looked down, a quiet fondness pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Ilara loved it." The name lingered between them, tender and delicate. "Tell me about them," Harlan said. "Please, anything you're willing to share." Evan exhaled, watching Lunette trace patterns in the grass with her shoe. "They met at a neighborhood mural project," he began. "Ilara was painting a stretch of sky, big, soft blue strokes, the kind she said made her feel like she could breathe. Silas was volunteering, helping set up ladders and carrying paint trays. He smiled faintly. He spilled a whole bucket of paint at her feet on the first day. Harlan felt a small, unexpected warmth in his chest. "Sounds like something she'd forgive quickly." She laughed. Evan said the paint made the sidewalk prettier. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about music, about the lake towns up north they both dreamed of, about starting fresh someday. The wind rustled nearby branches, carrying the faint smell of roasted chestnuts from a food cart. Families wandered past them, the hum of everyday life blending into a gentle symphony that made the world feel softer. "They wanted a quiet life," Evan continued. "Not because they were running from anything. They were running towards something simple." Harlan swallowed hard. Simple. How often had he denied Ilara that very thing? Lunette returned with a handful of orange leaves. "These match the sky from my dream," she said. "The one where Mommy was smiling at me." Evan bent down. "You had that dream again?" She nodded. But this time she wasn't far away. She was here. She tapped her chest lightly. "Right here." The gesture, so innocent and certain, pierced something inside Harlan that he had long tried to bury. He couldn't help kneeling to her level. "Dreams can be special," he said softly. "Sometimes they help us remember people we love." Lunette leaned in slightly, as though accepting his words as truth. "Daddy said the same thing," she replied. Then she tilted her head. "Did you ever dream about my mommy?" The question hit him with surprising force. Evan looked up, uncertain whether to intervene, but Harlan shook his head gently. "Yes," he said after a long pause. "Not often, but sometimes. I dream of her as a little girl, running ahead of me, and I always wish I had run a little faster." Lunette took this in with the solemn understanding that only certain children, ones who've known loss early, seem to possess. She reached out and placed her small hand on his. "You can walk with me now," she said, "so you don't have to run." He let out a slow breath, his throat tightening. "I'd like that," he whispered. They walked for a while longer until Lunette asked if they could sit and draw. Evan spread a small blanket he'd brought, and the three of them settled under a patch of sunlight. Lunette handed each of them a crayon and a scrap of paper. "You have to draw something that makes you happy," she instructed. Harlan looked at the blank page. What made him happy? He could barely remember the last time he'd asked himself that. But then he glanced at Lunette, earnest, patient, waiting, and something unknotted inside him. He began to draw. Harlan's drawing came slowly hesitant lines, forming the outline of a small lake surrounded by trees. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. When Lunette leaned over to see, her eyes widened. "You drew Mommy's dream place," she said softly. "The lake with the trees. Daddy told me she wanted to paint it one day." The words slid into him like a key turning in an old lock. He hadn't known. He hadn't known so much. Evan watched quietly, surprised. "She described that lake to me once," he said. "How did you?" "I don't know," Harlan admitted. "I just remembered something she said a long time ago." Lunette placed her drawing beside his, a sun shaped like a heart, shining over three figures holding hands. She nudged his arm gently. "Maybe we can go there one day," she said. "You, me, and Daddy." The invitation felt fragile, precious. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. A breeze lifted the papers, sending one skittering across the grass. Lunette chased after it, giggling as it spun away from her fingertips. But when she reached it, she suddenly stopped frozen, staring at something beyond the path. Evan stood, alarmed. "Lunette, sweetheart." The little girl didn't move. Harlan felt the shift instantly, the stillness, the way her shoulders tightened, the way her small hand slowly dropped to her side. When he stepped closer, she turned toward him with wide, unsettled eyes. "There's a lady," she whispered. "She was watching us." "Oh." Evan scanned the area. "Where?" Lunette pointed toward the trees. "She looked like Mommy, but older." The park around them remained bright and ordinary, but something in her voice made the air feel different, charged, trembling with possibility. And when Harlan followed her gaze, he felt the faintest prickle down his spine. Someone had been there, and whoever she wasn't a stranger. The following week unfolded with an unusual softness for Harlan, as though the corners of his days had been gently rounded. He found himself noticing things he used to overlook: the warm smell of roasted nuts drifting from a street cart, the mellow hum of a saxophone echoing through the subway tunnels, the way sunlight brushed the tops of brownstones in late afternoon. It all felt different now, as if the city were nudging him towards something he'd spent too long resisting. Saturday arrived again, and with it came a quiet anticipation that pulled him toward Prospect Park before he was fully awake. He brought a small thermos of hot chocolate. Evan had mentioned that Lunette liked it. Not too sweet, with lots of foam. He wasn't sure how to make foam, but he tried. The park welcomed him with its usual symphony of weekend life. Children chased bubbles, joggers followed their steady rhythms, couples strolled lazily under the amber-canopied branches. And there, near the familiar patch of grass, he spotted them: Evan, adjusting a picnic blanket, Lunette crouched over a small sketchbook, brow furrowed in concentration. When she saw him, she didn't run this time. She simply smiled and waved, as if greeting someone she expected someone who belonged. "You're here," she said, scooting aside to make space. "I'm drawing a squirrel, but he won't sit still." Harlan chuckled softly. "Animals are like that. They don't make appointments." And she giggled at the idea, flipping the page to show him a collection of drawings, trees, suns, and one figure who looked suspiciously like him, complete with silver hair and a soft blue sweater she'd drawn from memory. Evan offered a nod of greeting, more relaxed than before. "Morning." She's been up since 6, asking whether you'd bring anything fun. I brought hot chocolate, Harlan said, holding up the thermos. Lunette gasped. With foam? He hesitated. I attempted the foam. It may not be perfect. She clapped her hands anyway, delighted by the effort rather than the outcome. That alone loosened something in him. They settled on the blanket, sipping warm drinks while the park moved gently around them. Birds hopped near their feet, hopeful for crumbs. The rustle of leaves overhead made a soothing backdrop, almost like a memory humming in the background. At one point, Lunette crawled closer and leaned against Harlan's sidelight, casual, natural, in a way that made his heart stutter. He held still, not wanting to disturb her. She smelled faintly of crayons and autumn wind. "Can you tell me a story?" she asked. "A story?" he echoed. "What kind?" "One about Mommy," she said simply. "A happy one?" Evan's eyes flicked up, cautious but encouraging. Harlan searched his memory, dusting off images he hadn't visited in years. "Well," he began, "when your mommy was about your age, she had a habit of trying to save every lost creature in the neighborhood. Stray cats, wounded pigeons, even a squirrel with a bent tail." Lunette gasped. "A squirrel? Like the one I'm drawing?" "Exactly like that," he said, smiling. "She carried it home in her jacket once. Your grandmother nearly fainted." Evan laughed, quiet and surprised. "That sounds like her." Harlan nodded, though the memory tightened his chest with something bittersweet. "She always said the world felt kinder when you helped something small." Lunette rested her head against him, her voice soft. "I think Mommy would like you telling me that." He swallowed, unable to trust his voice. For a moment, he simply let the silence wrap around them like a soft blanket. Later, they wandered toward the lake, with Lunette skipping ahead to chase ripples along the shore. Evan walked beside Harlan, hands deep in his pockets. "She's warming up to you faster than I expected," Evan said. "She usually doesn't with new people." "I'm not sure what I've done," Harlan admitted. "Sometimes it isn't what you do," Evan replied. "Sometimes kids just feel something true." Harlan absorbed that quietly, unsure whether to feel humbled or terrified. They stopped near a bench overlooking the water. A light breeze tugged at the edges of their jackets, carrying distant laughter and the smell of warm pretzels. Lunette crouched near the waterline, tracing circles in the sand with a stick. "She said something last night," Evan murmured. "Said she felt like she knew you, even though she just met you." Harlan felt his breath catch. "What did you tell her?" "That maybe she recognizes a piece of someone she loved," Evan said softly. "Kids understand things differently than we do." The lake shimmered with reflected sunlight, small waves quietly brushing the shore. Harlan listened to them lap, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat he hadn't tuned into for years. Then Lunette called out from a distance, waving toward something along the path. "Daddy, look, that lady is here again." Avon stiffened. Harlan turned, his pulse stirred with something he couldn't name. Harlan followed Lunette's pointing hand toward the tree line. At first, all he saw were shifting branches and the soft flutter of fallen leaves skimming across the ground. Families wandered nearby. Joggers passed in steady rhythm, but nothing stood out until a figure stepped briefly into view. A woman, standing half-hidden behind a maple trunk. She wasn't close enough for features to be clear, but her posture still, observant, felt unmistakably intentional. She watched them with a kind of quiet intensity, the way someone looks at a photograph they aren't sure they're ready to touch. Evan moved quickly, placing a gentle but protective hand on Lunette's shoulder. "Sweetheart, stay close. I saw her last time," Lunette whispered, gripping her father's sleeve. "She looked almost like Mommy, only older." The words hit Harlan harder than he expected. He stared at the woman, at the way she seemed caught between wanting to approach and wanting to disappear. Something about her silhouette tugged at the edges of memory, familiar in a way that made his pulse stumble. Before he could step forward, a passing cyclist cut across the path. When the momentary distraction cleared, the woman was gone, vanished into the deeper part of the park as though she had never been there. Evan scanned the trees, jaw tight. "I don't like this," he murmured. "Someone watching her, watching us." But Harlan kept his gaze fixed on the empty space where the woman had stood. There was no fear in him, only an ache he couldn't name, rising like a tide he'd ignored for too long. Because deep down, beneath the swirl of questions, something inside him whispered, he knew that face. or he once had. The following Monday dawned with a chill that hinted at winter's slow approach. Harlan woke earlier than usual, the restlessness from the park still lingering in his mind. The mysterious woman, Lunette's unsettled expression, the way Evan's shoulders tightened it all replayed in fragments. But beneath those concerns, something else weighed heavier. The quiet, growing desire to be present in the little girl's daily life, not just her weekends. He found himself standing at the window long before the city fully woke, watching headlights trace lazy arcs through the dim morning streets. For years, mornings had been empty markers of routine emails, news headlines, silent breakfasts. Today felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but purposeful. Around mid-morning, he made a decision. He texted Evan, "If you need help with school pickups this week, I'm available." It took a few minutes for the reply to come. "I appreciate it. Wednesday might help." PTA conference. Short day for the kids. Harlan stared at the message, feeling an unexpected mixture of nerves and anticipation. He typed back a simple confirmation, though his hands trembled slightly around the phone. On Wednesday afternoon, he arrived early at the elementary school, a modest red brick building tucked between a community garden and a small public library. The playground buzzed with end-of-day energy kids chasing each other, backpacks bouncing, parents chatting near the gate. The air smelled faintly of mulch, chalk dust, and the caramel popcorn sold by a vendor near the corner. Harlan stood near a tree, unsure of where to properly place himself. He felt out of place among the easy, practiced rhythms of pickup routines. But then the school doors opened, and a wave of small bodies spilled out. Among them, a familiar lavender jacket darted into view. Lunetta spotted him immediately. Her face brightened in that pure way only children manage, as if seeing him made the world rearrange itself into something better. She ran straight toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "You're here!" she exclaimed, stopping just short of barreling into him. He steadied her with a gentle hand. "I told your dad I'd help today. He'll be here soon, but I thought I could walk with you until then." She reached out instinctively and slipped her small hand into his. He felt the warmth of her palm, soft and trusting, and something in him tightened with a mix of joy and sorrow, joy for what he was being given, sorrow for all he'd once lost. As they walked toward the fence, Lunette spoke in the quick, scattered way children do after school, telling him about a leaf she found shaped like a star, about a math game she liked, about a joke her friend told that she didn't quite understand but pretended she did. He listened, truly listened, and found himself smiling at her rambling stories. But then her voice softened. "Today wasn't all good," she murmured, eyes lowering. He slowed his steps. "What happened?" She kicked lightly at the ground, her sneaker brushing a curl of fallen bark. "Some kids said I don't look like Mommy. They said it's weird." Her voice trembled at the edges, the way fragile paper trembles in wind. "They asked if I was a mistake baby." Harlan's chest tightened so sharply he had to inhale slowly to stay grounded. He knelt so he could look at her eye to eye. "Sweetheart, children can say unkind things when they don't understand something, but nothing about you is wrong. And your mommy loved you more than anything." She sniffed, rubbing her eyes with her sleeve. "But they laughed. They said families are supposed to match." He felt anger, stir, protective, fierce, unfamiliar. But he softened his voice. "Families don't have to match on the outside. What matters is love, and you are very loved." She nodded but didn't fully lift her head. He could see the hurt lingering, heavy in a way no child should have to carry. Then a small voice behind them said, "Hey, Hart, why were you talking to that old man?" Harlan turned. 3 kids stood by the fence, whispering to each other, glancing at Lunette with the careless boldness of children who didn't understand the weight of their words. Lunette shrank slightly behind him. Before he could speak, Evan arrived breathless, coat half-zipped, relief flooding his expression when he saw them. But his relief shifted instantly when he saw Lunette's red-rimmed eyes. "What happened?" he asked, voice tight. Harlan opened his mouth to explain, but Lunette beat him to it. Her voice came out small, cracked. "They said I don't belong." Evan's face changed. Not in anger, but in heartbreak. He pulled her close, holding her with the kind of fierce tenderness that made even passing parents hush their conversations. Harlan stood beside them, feeling the sting of the moment settle like cold rain across his chest. He wished he could shield her from every unkind word in the world. He wished he'd known how to shield Elara, too. As they began walking toward the corner, Evan still holding Lunette close, Harlan noticed something across the street. A woman, standing still, watching them. The same silhouette, the same quiet intensity, but this time, she stepped forward. The woman crossed the street slowly, each step measured, as if she feared approaching too quickly might shatter something delicate. Evan instinctively shifted Lunette behind him, though he kept one arm around her shoulders. Harlan stood just slightly ahead, not confrontational, but steady like a man bracing for news he wasn't ready to hear. When she came close enough for them to see her clearly, the afternoon light caught the lines around her eyes, gentle lines, not hardened ones. She looked to be in her early 40s, neatly dressed, her dark coat buttoned all the way to her throat. There was no hostility in her expression, only hesitation and something akin to sorrow. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to scare anyone. She looked down at Lunette, and her voice faltered. Evan tightened his hold on his daughter. "Do we know you?" The woman shook her head once. "Not really. I knew Elara." A stillness settled over the small corner of the sidewalk. Even the sounds of children behind the fence seemed to dim. Harlan's breath caught. Evan's jaw tensed. Lunette looked between them, fragile and confused. The woman continued, her voice barely above the wind. "My name is Marielle Crane. Elara and I worked together at the Arts Co-op years ago. We were close, closer than most people knew." Harlan steadied himself. "Why didn't you ever contact us?" "I tried," she whispered. "Back then. But I wasn't family, and I didn't want to intrude on grief that wasn't mine to claim." Evan frowned. "Then why now?" Marielle swallowed. Her gaze shifted again to Lunette, gentle but heavy with unspoken memory. "Because," she began, then paused to breathe through her trembling. "Because I made Elara a promise, and I've been carrying it for years, not knowing if I should keep it or if keeping it would cause more harm." The air around them tightened. "What promise?" Harlan asked quietly. Marielle reached into her coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out a small envelope, edges worn, name written in Elara's familiar looping hand. It said, "For my daughter someday." Evan exhaled sharply. Harlan felt his heart shift painfully. Lunette stared at the envelope as if it glowed. Marielle held it out with both hands. "She wrote this when she found out she was pregnant," Marielle said. "She wanted her daughter to know something about her. Something she felt she couldn't say aloud back then." Evan hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing the fragile paper. Marielle continued, "I've watched from afar, because I wasn't sure if it was my place. But seeing the three of you today, seeing how much love surrounds her," she looked at Lunette again, "I realized it's time." Lunette's small voice finally broke through the silence. "Is it from Mommy?" Marielle nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, it's from her." The little girl clutched Evan's sleeve, her eyes shining. "Can we read it?" Evan looked uncertain, torn between protecting her and honoring what had been left behind. Before he could answer, Marielle stepped back. "I should go," she said. "This moment belongs to your family." She turned to leave. But Harlan, moved by something deeper than words, spoke softly. "Thank you for keeping her memory safe." Marielle paused, nodded once, then walked away, disappearing into the drifting leaves along the sidewalk. Evan stood motionless, the envelope in his trembling hand. Harlan gently rested a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare gesture of shared weight. Lunette tugged the hem of Evan's coat. "Daddy, what did Mommy want to tell me?" Evan stared down at the envelope, at the name written in love, in hope, in a past that still reached forward. He swallowed hard. "We'll open it together," he said, voice unsteady. "At home. All of us." But as they began walking, Harlan sensed it. The letter was not the only thing Marielle carried. There was more, a truth still waiting. And whatever it was, it would change everything. That evening, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Evan set the envelope on the kitchen table, as though it were something fragile enough to break under a breath. Lunette sat beside him, her legs swinging softly, while Harlan stood close, but not intrusive hands, loosely folded, patience etched into every line of his face. Outside, the last streaks of daylight dimmed over Minneapolis, turning the windows into soft mirrors. The hum of old radiators and distant traffic filled the silence. Evan finally spoke. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Lunette nodded, though her fingers curled tightly around the edge of her chair. He opened the envelope. A single folded page rested inside, written in Ilara's unmistakable handwriting, gentle strokes, small loops. The ink slightly faded. He unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud, his voice steady but low. "To my little star. If you're reading this, you're old enough to wonder where you come from, and I want you to hear my truth, not the world's." Lunette leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the page. "I was scared when I found out you were coming. Not of you, but of not being enough. I wasn't sure how to raise someone when I was still learning how to be myself. But the moment I felt you move, I knew you were the best part of me. You were never a mistake. You were my miracle." Harlan exhaled softly, eyes turning glassy. "If life keeps me from raising you, I hope you grow up with people who love gently. People who try, even when they fail. And if you ever feel different from others, just remember, stars don't match the sky. They shine because they stand out." Evan's voice cracked at the last line. Lunette reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. When he finished, the room stayed still for a long moment. Then Lunette whispered, "Mommy knew I'd feel sad today." Harlan knelt beside her. "She knew you would grow into someone who feels deeply. That's a gift." Evan nodded, brushing a tear before it could fall. "She wanted you to know she loved you before you even opened your eyes." Hemsing. The little girl pressed the letter to her chest. "I want to keep it by my bed," she said. "You will," Evan promised. Just then, Harlan noticed something still inside the envelope, tiny, almost overlooked. A small photograph slipped out and fluttered onto the table. It showed Ilara sitting on a bench near a frozen lake, wrapped in a wool coat, holding something close under her scarf, her other hand resting gently over her stomach. On the back, a short message, taken by MC. Emble. Evan frowned. MC. That must be Marielle Crane. Harlan felt a quiet tension stir. If Marielle took the picture, she hadn't been just a friend. Before he could say anything more, Evan's phone buzzed on the table. A text. Unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about what Ilara didn't tell you." Harlan and Evan exchanged a look, heavy, uncertain. Lunette hugged the letter tightly, unaware of the new weight settling in the room. The past, it seemed, wasn't finished speaking. Evan stared at the message for a long moment, the screen's glow reflecting off the quiet worry in his eyes. Harlan leaned slightly closer, not to intrude, simply to share the weight. "Do you know the number?" Harlan asked softly. Evan shook his head. "No, but it has to be her. No one else would send something like that." Before either of them could decide what to say next, Lunette padded back into the room, carrying her favorite stuffed rabbit under one arm. She held the letter against her chest, as though afraid it might slip away in the night. "Daddy," she whispered, "can we read it again before bed?" Evan's face softened, and he knelt, so they were eye level. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll read it as many times as you want." She smiled faintly, then hugged him around the neck. Harlan watched the embrace with quiet tenderness, a warmth settling through him that he hadn't felt in years. Not since Ilara was little. Evan's voice cracked at the last line. Lunette reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. When he finished, the room stayed still for a long moment. Then Lunette whispered, "Mommy knew I'd feel sad today." Harlan knelt beside her. "She knew you would grow into someone who feels deeply. That's a gift." Evan nodded, brushing a tear before it could fall. "She wanted you to know she loved you before you even opened your eyes." Hemsing. The little girl pressed the letter to her chest. "I want to keep it by my bed," she said. "You will," Evan promised. Just then, Harlan noticed something still inside the envelope, tiny, almost overlooked. A small photograph slipped out and fluttered onto the table. It showed Ilara sitting on a bench near a frozen lake, wrapped in a wool coat, holding something close under her scarf, her other hand resting gently over her stomach. On the back, a short message, taken by MC. "Can we read it now?" Evan picked her up and settled on the couch. Harlan sat beside them, listening quietly as the letter was read again, its soft truths filling the room like a familiar hymn. By the time Lunette drifted to sleep on Evan's chest, the envelope resting beside her, the apartment had grown still. Evan carried her to bed, tucking the letter gently on her nightstand. When he returned, he looked older, not in years, but in responsibility. "We meet her tomorrow," he said. After Lunette went to brush her teeth, Evan let out a long breath. "What if this isn't something I should dig into?" he murmured. "What if Alara didn't want it known?" Harlan considered this carefully.
Son, sometimes the past comes back because it's unfinished, and maybe Marielle has carried something she can't keep anymore.
Evan rubbed his face. "Or she wants something. Then we find out. Together." Because even in the soft glow of the room, the same unspoken question pressed at both their thoughts. What truth had Alara left behind? And why had Marielle waited until now to reveal it? The next afternoon brought a soft snowfall that dusted the sidewalks in pale gray. Harlan and Evan walked together toward Grafton Cafe, the small place Alara had loved years ago. The sign's paint had faded. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside. Just stepping near it brought back memories neither man was ready for. Evan tugged his scarf tighter. "I haven't been here since—" "I know," Harlan said gently. "We'll take this one step at a time." Inside, the cafe smelled of cinnamon and old wood, the kind of scent that clings to a place built on years of people staying longer than they meant to. A few retirees sat near the back, reading newspapers, sipping slow coffees. The familiarity settled over Harlan like a blanket. Marielle Crane sat at a corner table. She wasn't tense this time. Instead, she looked tired, like someone who'd rehearsed a conversation so many times it had worn her out, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Evan approached cautiously. "You said you had something to tell us." Marielle nodded, motioning for them to sit. "I appreciate you coming." Harlan's gaze softened. "We're listening." She hesitated, searching for the right beginning. "Alara trusted me with things she didn't tell many people. But I kept them because I thought it was the safest choice. Now, I'm not sure staying silent was ever right." Evan leaned forward. "This is about Lunette?" "In part," Marielle said. "But it's more about Alara, who she was, what she carried." The hum of the cafe faded beneath the weight of her words. "She was scared," Marielle continued. "Not of motherhood. She adored the idea of having Lunette. I need answers. But I won't let anything hurt Lunette." "You won't," Harlan said. "Not while I'm here." A faint snowfall began outside, flakes drifting down in slow spirals against the streetlight, as if the night were trying to quiet the world for a while. But the calm didn't quite reach them. Harlan inhaled sharply, the air catching at the back of his throat. "Not because you meant harm," she added quickly, "but because Alara knew you carried expectations, ones she could never quite meet. She didn't want her child to inherit that weight." The words struck like a slow, deliberate truth rather than a blow. Harlan lowered his gaze, absorbing the ache. But Marielle wasn't finished. "She asked me to help her leave once Lunette was born, to keep the peace, to make sure she wasn't forced into choices she didn't want." Evan rubbed his forehead. "But she never left." "No," Marielle said quietly, "because she never got the chance." The three of them sat with that sorrow for a long breath. Then Marielle reached into her bag and placed a small, worn notebook on the table, Alara's handwriting covering the cover. "She asked me to keep this safe," Marielle whispered. "It explains everything she planned, everything she feared, and everything she hoped Lunette would someday have." Evan stared at the journal as if it carried a pulse. "I didn't come to cause trouble," Marielle said, voice shaking. "I came because her daughter deserves the full truth. And because there's one more thing I haven't told you." She looked at Harlan directly, unflinching. "Something Alara wanted you to know, but never had the courage to say." The warmth of the cafe seemed to thin, replaced by a quiet tension that pressed between them. She was scared of losing her place, scared someone would try to take the baby from her. Evan's brows pulled together. "Take her? Why would anyone?" Marielle folded her hands. "Because Alara planned to leave Minneapolis, to start fresh out of state. She didn't want to raise her daughter under pressure." Harlan's jaw tensed. "Pressure from whom?" Marielle met his eyes gently. Not accusing, just truthful. "From you, Mr. Hart. She left because she thought you loved achievement more than people, and she didn't want her daughter to grow up thinking she had to earn affection to deserve it." The words settled over the table like falling snow, soft, but freezing everything they touched. Harlan didn't flinch. He simply closed his eyes, as if he'd been expecting a truth like this for years, yet still wasn't ready for it. A long breath escaped him, thin, trembling, almost grateful for the honesty, even in its pain. Evan watched his father quietly. For the first time, He seemed to see not the man who'd been distant or demanding, but someone carrying old regrets like unhealed bruises. Marielle continued, her voice gentle. She told me once that you were both alike, driven, proud, and afraid of disappointing each other. She hoped that someday, maybe time, would soften both sides. Harlan's throat tightened. I wish she had stayed long enough to see that it eventually did. Marielle nodded, tears gathering. She believed you had goodness in you. She never questioned that, but she didn't know how to reach it without losing herself. Silence took the cafe for a moment, broken only by the soft clatter of dishes from the counter. Finally, Marielle slid the journal toward Evan. This belongs to Lunette now, but you should read it first so you can help her understand the hard parts when she's older. Evan placed a protective hand over it. Thank you for trusting us with this. Marielle stood, pulling her coat around her. I'm not here to claim anything. I just wanted the truth to stop living in a drawer. And I wanted that little girl to grow up knowing her mother fought hard to give her freedom. Before leaving, she looked once more at Harlan. You still have time, she said softly. Maybe not to fix everything behind you, but to choose differently for what's ahead. Aufek. Then she walked out into the gentle snowfall, disappearing behind the glow of passing headlights. Evan let out a long breath. Dad, you okay? Harlan took a moment before answering. His voice was rough around the edges, but steady. Yes, because now I know what she feared, and now I know what I need to be, for her daughter and for you. Evan's eyes softened, the distance between them shrinking in a way neither had dared hope for years. They stood and stepped outside together. The snow had thickened, coating the street in a quiet white. The kind of evening that made the world feel hushed, reflective, perfect for two men learning how to rebuild. As they reached the corner, Evan tucked the journal safely inside his coat. For Lunette, he said. For family, Harlan replied. But both of them could feel it. The story wasn't finished. Not yet. Something in that journal, something left unsaid, was waiting for them at home. Snow followed them all the way home, brushing against the windows like soft whispers. The apartment was dim when they stepped inside, only the warm glow from the hallway lamp guiding their steps. Lunette sat on the living room rug, surrounded by colored pencils, drawing quietly while humming to herself. She looked up when they entered. Did the lady tell you something important? Evan exchanged a glance with Harlan, gentle, cautious. She gave us something special, Evan said, kneeling beside her. A journal your mommy wrote. Lunette's eyes widened with a mix of curiosity and tenderness. Did she write about me? About you, Evan said softly, and about who she hoped we'd all become. She slid closer, lifting the journal with both hands as if it were a gift from the past. Evan helped her settle on the couch, and Harlan sat beside them, giving her space but staying near. They opened it together. Inside were short entries, simple memories, hopes, worries, scribbled in late-night handwriting, notes about baby names, quick drawings of tiny shoes she wanted to make, thoughts about the life she imagined for her daughter. Lunette giggled when she saw a doodle of a crooked newborn hat. She wasn't very good at drawing hats, she whispered. No, Evan smiled. But she tried. Harlan watched them, the words on the page blurring slightly as he blinked away emotion. Every line carried a trace of Alara's voice, her softness, her doubt, her fierce love. He felt the weight of what she hadn't been able to finish, and the gift she had left behind. Then Lunette paused at one small page. Daddy, what does this mean? It was a single sentence, written in a rush. If anything happens, tell him he still has time to change. Don't let him hide behind his work. Evan glanced quietly at Harlan. But Lunette wasn't looking at either of them when she spoke again. She looked at the window, at the falling snow, thoughtful in a way that felt older than her years. Mommy wanted you to be happy, she whispered. And she wanted Grandpa to be here. Harlan felt something shift inside him, an ache loosening, replaced by something warm and steady. Before he could respond, Lunette crawled into his lap and leaned her head against his chest, the journal still open in her hands. You're here now, she said simply. So, Mommy would smile. Harlan closed his eyes, letting the small weight of her settle against him, and found that, for the first time in years, his breathing eased. A quiet peace filled the room. But the moment wasn't finished yet, because near the back of the journal, a folded page remained untouched. Its edge, slightly darker, worn from being opened many times. Evan noticed it first. "What's that?" he murmured. Lunette lifted it gently, and as she unfolded the page, Harlan felt every part of the room grow still. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a drawing. It was something else entirely. And it would change the way they understood Ilara's last days. The folded page opened with a soft crack, revealing a few hurried lines written in Ilara's familiar hand, ink pressed deeper than the rest. Evan read it quietly, the words sinking in. "If anything happens to me, tell my father I forgave him long before he ever knew he needed forgiveness." And beneath it, "He deserved another chance. I just didn't know how to give it." Lunette looked up, puzzled. "Why would Mommy forgive Grandpa?" Harlan swallowed, his voice gentle. "Because she knew I loved her, even when I didn't show it the right way." Lunette took his hand, small and warm. "You show me now. That's enough. M." The simple truth in her voice eased something heavy inside him. Evan closed the journal, a quiet acceptance settling over the room. "She wanted us to move forward," he said softly. Harlan nodded. "Then we will." Lunette curled between them on the couch, resting her head against Harlan's arm. Outside, snow drifted lightly, softening the world into calm white. "Can we visit Mommy's lake this weekend?" she murmured. "Yes," Evan whispered. "We'll go together." The journal lay on the table, a final bridge from past to present, and in the warm glow of the living room, Harlan felt it clearly. Not regret, not loss, but home. In the quiet glow of that winter evening, as 3 generations finally sat together under one roof, it felt as if the long road of sorrow had gently folded into something softer, something warm enough to hold. The old wounds that once kept them apart now felt like distant echoes, replaced by new laughter, shared stories, and the simple peace of knowing no one had to walk alone anymore. And so, from the soft rustle of a child's drawing to the steady comfort of a father's hand, their family found its way back slowly, imperfectly, but truthfully. The lesson is simple but timeless. Love, when given freely, has the power to rebuild what years of silence once broke. Every person deserves a place to belong, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is open the door and let forgiveness take a seat at the table. Happiness doesn't come from wealth or success. It grows in the quiet corners of everyday kindness, like a porch light left on for someone who's finally coming home. Just as an old lamp in a Minnesota farmhouse can guide loved ones through a snowy night, a single act of compassion can brighten the darkest seasons of our lives. It's a truth many of us learn with age. When we choose to give grace, we don't just heal others, we heal ourselves too. Before we close this story, I'd love to hear from you. If this journey touched your heart, press 1. If you feel it could be better or wish to share a thought, press 0. And if this warm little tale found a place in your evening, feel free to join us again. There will always be another story waiting by the fireside.